right now, unless they have some kind of crazy trade, the Panthers are not going to be involved in that first round. How do you view the draft as somebody that, is obviously, keen on the Panthers and keeps up and reports on them on a daily basis to, at this point, not have them involved in the entire first round?
It's tough because I think that, especially this year, needing a wide receiver, there are three guys that are clearly above everybody else, right? Malik Neighbors from LSU, Rome Odunze from Washington, and then the obvious one is Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State. And then I think Brian Thomas Jr. of LSU he might be a step below those three, but I think he's even a step above that next group of wide receivers. So what is frustrating is I don't think they are going to be in position to go up and get Brian Thomas Jr. And I think really that is who the Carolina Panthers need. I think, though, if you can take the receiver of it all out of your mind for just a second, needing some help at the interior of the offensive line at center. This is a fairly strong class of offensive tackles, at least through the first two rounds. After that, things start to get a little bit shaky. You can fill needs with 2 second-round picks. So in terms of everything but wide receiver, in terms of the desperate needs, I'm not so put out, but I like A.D. Mitchell. I like Xavier Legette, but I do wish they would be in position to really make a move for Thomas, which they just aren't without a first-round pick.
The Panthers organization, and I think your podcast name, This Team is Killing Us, What the Carolina Panthers Do to Good People, is a fitting name because there's not been a lot of trust in this organization. And yes, the common thinking is they're probably going to grab a wide receiver with the first pick, wherever that ends up being for them. Is there a spot, and we talk about this a lot with teams that are as bad as the Panthers were this past year, that you can't really go wrong with any kind of pick. Is there a place that they could go wrong realistically in picking early in this draft?
I think the number one thing they could do wrong is overvaluing just how much they have to go out there and replace Brian Burns this year. I've been saying it. So we have, since the beginning of April, been doing a mock draft every single day, a Panthers-specific mock draft every single day. And I've come around to the thinking that this defense is a 2-year project at least, right? Because it's not just that they lost Brian Burns. They also lost Frankie Louvu, who is kind of the emotional leader of that defense. They lost so many pieces from the secondary that I think that at 33, we absolutely have to replace Brian Burns and get that next franchise edge rusher is a mistake because it's not going to make a difference this year the way a wide receiver could.
We'll pay attention to the quarterbacks in the draft coming up next as Dimitri Ravenna sticks around for another segment. Again, NFL draft coming up tomorrow night. A real quick reminder, go online to 1075thegame.com. Enter as always for your chance to win the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. If Gamecock hitter gets Grand Slam, you could win the $1,000 currently sitting in the pot as they head to take on the Kentucky Wildcats this upcoming weekend. More draft talks to wrap up hour number 1 of the Extra Point next here on The Game. Welcome back in, Extra Point. Tyler Head, Dimitri Ravendos along with me for a couple more minutes here on this Wednesday, day before the NFL draft. And the entire draft, obviously, very hard to predict, but I think we can all safely say that Caleb Williams is going to go with the number 1 overall pick to the Chicago Bears coming up tomorrow night. But a lot of conversation around Caleb Williams, as it's been this entire offseason. And you brought this to my attention yesterday, that this former anonymous NFL scout, talking about the character of Caleb Williams, which is a little bit out there, a little bit different, described him as if Prince was playing quarterback, implying that in a negative light. But when I think about it, I mean, Prince was very successful. A lot of people liked Prince. I don't think that's quite the ding on Caleb Williams that this guy, whoever it is, thinks it is.
More importantly, Prince was awesome and had a lot of sex, right? Like, what is it we don't think is quarterbackish about Prince outside of the flamboyance? Like, I think it is meant to convey that this is an incredibly skilled person that, this is just my guess, is it's meant to convey it's someone that is incredibly skilled in all the ways you want, but is a little too feminine for your taste.
Sure.
I mean, maybe that's what it's meant to imply.
Yeah.
This is what I've been told about Caleb Williams, and it's something that I think is going to become more and more common in drafts as the scouts get so much older than the guys involved, is Caleb Williams is like Gen Z to the extreme, right? The painted fingernails, the wearing the emotions on the sleeve. It is not about not being tough. It's not about not playing quarterback. It's about very much being, like the way my kids are, very comfortable with people knowing who they are as a person and what their flaws may or may not be. I understand why it makes NFL scouts uncomfortable, because it's something that they are not used to. But all of the evaluations of Caleb Williams say that this is like almost like Trevor Lawrence level, once in a lifetime or once in a generation prospect kind of quarterback. If it scares you away, you're not very good at your job, right?
Right. Yeah, at the end of the day, as long as he can perform on the field, who cares what his fingernails look like or how much he decides to cry when he's not on the field? Like, that's a completely different conversation. I do think it's interesting, though, that he's going to be going to Chicago. Chicago's a very tough media market, and that's a fan base that's been longing after success for a long time. How quickly, and maybe this, in line with him being super Gen Z, like you said, how quickly can this fan base and this city turn on him if things start to go south, even in year number 1?
Well, I mean, we saw it with Justin Fields, right? Like, it didn't take long for people in Chicago to say this is just not the dude. I do think there's going to be a little bit more pressure on Caleb Williams because, they're hungry for success. They are particularly hungry for success at the quarterback spot, right? They're the only team in NFL history that has never had a 4,000-yard passer and never had a quarterback throw 30 touchdowns in a single season. Think about that. Like,
that's insane.
Especially considering they are one of the oldest franchises in the NFL. So I think there will be pressure because I think that Bears fans are anticipating that this is a level of quarterback that the team has just never had before. But I think he is more up to it, Caleb Williams is, than we are giving him credit for.
Yeah, and again, all the intangibles are there. We obviously saw him play extremely well in the Heisman Trophy season, 2 years ago at Southern Cal. And even this past year, while, people weren't talking about him in the same light, his numbers are still very comparable to what he had done the season before. I think he's going to be fine at the NFL level. I'm just interested to see how the media dynamic of having this different type of quarterback sits with the people in Chicago.
Well, I would say right now that a lot of the whatever dings there are for this season actually are very similar to the arguments being made that UNC's Drake May shouldn't be number 2. Anything that you think the guy should have accomplished that he didn't, I would invite you to look at what he was playing with, right? I think there were a lot of times that Southern Cal left Caleb Williams hanging in terms of being able to complete that big pass, in terms of being able to make that big play downfield, just like Drake May at UNC. So I'm not trying to excuse whatever struggles Williams had from year 1 in Southern California to year 2, but I do think you got to look at the circumstance. And I think if you're a Bears fan, you've got to consider, okay, how much can he do with this roster? It is vastly improved. but certainly it is far from being the best one in the NFC North.
Last one here before we let you go. Got about 30 seconds. Outside of Caleb Williams, perhaps no quarterbacks being talked about more than J.J. McCarthy and where he ends up. I've seen him projected anywhere from 3rd to about 15th. Where do you think he lands?
I think that he is going number 5. I think that the Cardinals have made it clear they are open for business, but they want to be bowled over. I think that probably means the Cardinals want to pick up a 3rd first-round pick in order to give up number 4. The only team that could do that for them is Minnesota, and I think Minnesota's content to wait till number 5 and make that same offer to L.A.
He's Dimitri Venos. We'll check back with him next week, see how the Panthers draft, and see if there's any hope in this fan base going into the 2024 season. Appreciate it as always, Dimitri.
All right, buddy. Thanks so much.
Hour number 2 coming up. We'll dive into this debate of how relevant South Carolina football is from a national standpoint. Up next on the Extra Point here on the game. Sweet. Hour number 2, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point here on The Game. Tyler Head along with you, Captain Dave, producing on the other side of the glass. Again, as always, appreciate our guy Dimitri Ravenos joining us for a couple of segments there, which he'll do most Wednesdays going forward. And again, next week we'll have the opportunity to talk to him about what the NFL draft looked like, what the Panthers did, and again, if there's any hope for the Panthers coming up in the 2024 season. I teased this at the beginning of the show, and I really want to take the time to dive into this over the course of this hour. However long you guys want to discuss this. I put up a poll on the 107.5 The Game Twitter yesterday afternoon because the thought popped into my head as I was driving, and I really wanted to kind of gauge the fan base's perception of where this team sits from a standpoint of national relevance, if that makes sense. And so I posed the question on Twitter, and again, you can still go and vote for it if you haven't already. It's pinned to the 107.5 The Game Twitter account. It is, in terms of national interest, how relevant do you feel the South Carolina football program is right now? Your options are very relevant, moderately relevant, somewhat relevant, and irrelevant. Now, somewhat relevant is winning at 43%, and that is where I think South Carolina football stands right now, and I'll get to my expanded thoughts on that in just a moment. Second place, though, is irrelevant at 34%, which I thought was quite staggering. I didn't think a lot of people were going to vote for very relevant, which is in dead last right now at 4%, but I thought people would fall somewhere between moderately and somewhat relevant. So to see irrelevant sitting second right now with a third of the vote is both surprising and concerning as of right now, but I think speaks to where a lot of people's minds are with this football program right now. Now, again, I personally think this program is in the somewhat relevant category because we have to kind of differentiate here. Obviously, we are home of the Gamecocks. We're the flagship station. We talk about them each and every day. Everybody here in Columbia cares about the Gamecocks for the most part because it's what exists within our community. But outside this bubble, the question of how relevant they are is what we're trying to get to the bottom of here. And the reason I ask this question is because I feel like where you fall on the relevance scale sets a baseline for where your expectations should be, not only for a given season, but for the ceiling of where the program can get to, if that makes sense. So I feel like it's pretty surprising to see so many people down on this program enough right now to say that they're irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. That's a pretty damning thing to say about what I assume, if you're voting on this, is your favorite college football team. But I get it, though, to a degree, because outside of a few games these past handful of years, South Carolina hasn't exactly moved the needle in a lot of ways, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is when, they beat Tennessee, they beat Clemson. Yeah, you got a lot of people paying attention, but that soon, I don't say kind of wore off, but they soon kind of went back to being not talked about as much, again, outside of this little bubble and outside of the SEC as a whole. But here's my line in the sand. I feel like South Carolina is going to fall into the somewhat relevant category because they've proven they can be relevant before. And yes, I know it was over 10 years ago, but when Coach Spurrier was able to lead this program to multiple double-digit win seasons back to back to back to back, it proved something that hadn't really been proven here before, that you can win at a place like South Carolina. It is possible. It is possible to make this program a hot commodity in college football. Now, in the decades since then, there's been a lot more downs and ups, and there's been a reason why there's been 3 different head coaches in the past 10 years, because you're still trying to find that right combination that clicks. But I cannot, in good conscience, put South Carolina in the irrelevant category because I just don't think it is true. I look at programs like Vanderbilt, Purdue, Trying to think. There's a lot of examples of programs that are at the bottom. Indiana, I'm not trying to pick on the Big Ten here, but Indiana, programs like that I think from the grand scheme of things are largely irrelevant in college football. I don't think that's not to say they can't have good moments, can't have good seasons, but when they have those moments and have those seasons, you don't believe that it's going to be sustainable, right? Case in point, Vanderbilt under James Franklin 10 some odd years ago. They put together 9-win season, I think in 2013 that ended up propelling him, not a 9-win season, a good season in 2013 that ended up propelling him to getting the Penn State job. But the perception around a team like Vanderbilt has always been so negative. We knew that success was not going to last, obviously. And, God love Clark Lee. He's trying his best. He's an alumni of the Vanderbilt University, but nobody believes, as much as he can talk about it in his press conferences and stuff like that, which is obviously the right thing to say. They did, by the way, Vanderbilt did go 9-4, back-to-back seasons, by the way, under James Franklin. But nobody thought that success was going to be sustained. They knew it was going to come crashing down at some point. And again, God love Clark Lee for what he's doing at Vanderbilt right now. He's trying his best. But nobody believes that Vanderbilt is going to be any sort of national contender at any point in the near future, because of what that program has been for the longest time and what we know their ceiling to be. And I think South Carolina is different. I think South Carolina, again, are you in the place that you want to be right now? You're not. Last season was a disappointment at 5-7 and missing a bowl game. But there's still belief, I feel like, that when South Carolina starts to put things together, that they can put themselves into one of those higher categories of being relevant from a national standpoint. Case in point, let's go back to what I mentioned a moment ago, where you beat Tennessee and you beat Clemson in back-to-back weeks at the end of the 2022 season, crashing both of their dreams of going to the college football playoff. Played a very spirited bowl game against Notre Dame in the Gator Bowl. Obviously ended up losing, but there was so much conversation in the offseason, not only locally but nationally as well, of, okay, what can South Carolina do after this? Can they take that next step? You're bringing it, Spencer Rattler coming back for another year, all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of belief and questioning of what they were going to be able to do with that momentum. Now, again, unfortunately, South Carolina was not able to capitalize on that this time around. But the fact that it was believable that people thought that they could turn it into something, I think keeps them above being irrelevant. And again, you ask the question of why does this conversation matter? Because I think that's where you can build your level of expectation for what this program can be going forward. If you're an irrelevant program, you hope for that occasional good season, that occasional big win, knocking off, a ranked team or something like that at home, being able to storm the field, great moment, whatever, before you go back to being relevant. But I think the South Carolina program has the ability to pull off those big wins, obviously, as we've seen in years past. Those wins at the end of the 2022 season. Don't forget when Muschamp went in and knocked off a number 1 Georgia on the road in 2019. You have those moments, obviously, but you also have the ability to become something of a regular contender, however you want to categorize that. And that doesn't mean you're going to be playing for the national championship or even in the college football playoff at a regular clip necessarily. But if South Carolina were to jump up and have a 8-4, 9-3 season and get one of those coveted 12 spots, is anybody going to sit there and be completely shocked by it? I don't think so. Would it surprise some people? Sure. But it's believable that South Carolina can be that kind of program that can break through into that next level of college football and be successful sustainably going forward. And again, I think that's where you start your level of expectations for what this program can be. And you look at what they're doing outside of the ball being played on the field. They're doing everything else right, seemingly. They're bringing in good recruiting classes. They've brought in great guys from the transfer portal this past cycle. It's believable, right? Unfortunately, and this goes back to why people are voting, or why so many people are voting for them to be, or thinking that they're irrelevant, because your dreams are almost been kind of crushed as of late, right? To where you had this almost high of high, literally the high of high this program's ever seen from Steve Spurrier a decade ago, with multiple double-digit win seasons, going to big bowl games, being ranked in the top 10, the whole 9 yards. You have not seen that success since then because the level of expectation for this program was rightfully raised to a high level. And unfortunately, outside of the 9-win season that Muschamp had back in 2017, it has not been able to live up to that success. But it doesn't mean that it can't get back there because you've seen the blueprint for what success can look like here and seemingly how to get there. Now, obviously, now we're pushing all of our chips into the table on Coach Beamer being able to get this program to that level. Can he get them back to those same heights? We don't know. But the road to get there is not this grand mountain that I think a lot of people are making it out to be, that it's never going to be sustainable. It's going to be easy? It's not. And it's going to get even tougher now that you're bringing in the programs like Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC. Obviously, you're still having to deal with Georgia. Alabama's obviously still going to be good. LSU, programs like that. It's not an easy road in the SEC, but I don't think it's this insurmountable, obstacle for this program to consistently be somewhere in that top half of the SEC. Which, again, in today's world of college football, with an expanded playoff going to 12 and soon to 14 and 16 and however much more it's going to expand over the years, you don't have to be the top dog anymore. You don't have to be in the SEC championship game. You can be third, fourth, maybe even fifth in the SEC, depending on what your record is, and still, if nothing else, be in the conversation for the college football playoff. Which, again, if you're in the conversation for the college football playoff, congratulations, you're very relevant. If you're in the conversation of being ranked in the top 25 in this new college football, I think that puts you in the moderately relevant category. If you're in that next tier of team that, again, I think has the ability to break through and being in those conversations, I think you qualify as being somewhat relevant. And then we take the other 70-some-odd teams that we don't think has any chance in the world, a snowball's chance, you know what I mean, of being any of those things. That's where I think you're in the irrelevant category. And I don't think South Carolina is that far down, though it seems like some of you think that way. I want to get to your thoughts on this. A lot of you are weighing in on the Firehouse Subtext line as well as on Twitter. And again, if you haven't voted yet, you still got time. It's going to be out for a couple more hours. I want to see what these final results look like when it's all said and done this afternoon. But where do you think South Carolina falls on the relevancy scale in college football? We'll hit that more coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday morning here on The Game. Welcome back in. Is the Extra Points Tyler head along with you here on your Wednesday morning here on The Game. Get back into the conversation about relevancy for the South Carolina football program in just a moment. A reminder, coming up tomorrow morning, early game, well, Bill specifically from the early game, going to be at the Chamber of Commerce Golf Tournament tomorrow morning from 6 until 9 a.m. Look forward to hearing him out there. And Preston will be back here in studio. Also coming up this weekend, you have Carolina baseball taking on Kentucky. First game Friday night at 7 o'clock, pregame coverage starting at 6:45. 4 o'clock first pitch on Saturday, and then a 2 o'clock first pitch on Sunday as South Carolina looks to get themselves back over 500 in conference play this upcoming weekend. Getting back in this conversation about relevancy. And again, you can go and vote on our Twitter poll at 1075 Game about, from a national standpoint, where you think South Carolina is on the relevancy scale. And a lot of this, again, is skewing very negative. And I do have a couple of you that have brought up a point that, yes, there are some Clemson fans that probably jumped in and voted on this as well that may have added a few percentage points to that irrelevancy. But gauging on the reactions that I'm getting on both Twitter as well as our Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100, seems like the vast majority of you think this program is irrelevant. And I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. You're entitled to your own opinion. You're able to think whatever you want about this program. I'm just doing this as a gauge to see what the general consensus is more often, or, what the general consensus is in the grand scheme of things. Jay on Twitter weighs in and says, consider, who is afraid to play them? To recruit against them, no bowl game. Yes, Vanderbilt, Purdue, Indiana University, irrelevant, no different from South Carolina. Funny videos, that's the highlight. Couldn't even score in the spring game. Not even somewhat relevant. Under 500, not relevant. I don't think the spring game thing matters all that much. You had a mixed up roster that was drafted between two teams. I don't think that really accounts for much there, but you bring up the funny videos thing, and I do think that's an interesting point to make, because a lot of the conversation that comes around South Carolina as of late and Coach Beamer is things that they do on social media. Funny videos. They did Sopranos thing for the season, which I thought was really, really neat. I don't think that's an indictment on them as necessarily a football program in terms of them not being relevant outside of that. But I can see why some people might raise a concern with that. On the flip side of things, let's see. Nigel weighs in and says, sad when 80% feels if this program's in shape it's in. Beamer's got to better get on the ball. This wait till next year has gotten old. Men's and women's hoops is taken over for sure. Beamer talks and talks, just need results, not more jaw-jacking. And I can see how a lot of people feel that way as well, to where it seems like the hype and the buildup of what this program has been said to be has not quite matched the expectations, and it does pale in comparison at this current moment to what's being done on the hardwood with Dawn Staley on the women's side of things and Lamont Paris on the mid side of things. So I think that puts even more of a spotlight on where South Carolina football is at this point in time. And again, that doesn't mean they can't be successful. It just means as of right now, they're not quite where they want to be. And yes, does Coach Beamer hype this program up? Absolutely. That's his job as head coach. He is there to be a glass half full kind of guy. Now, he is critical when he needs to be. Maybe not as critical as some people think that he should be, but if he's out there being doom and gloom the entire time, telling you how bad they suck, then that's not doing much for the program either. So, yes, is he more happy-go-lucky than some coaches out there tend to be? Sure, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. He's instilling hope in the program, instilling hope in his players, and, giving you hopefully what you want to hear in terms of them getting to whatever that point is going to be in terms of relevance overall. We'll head out to the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Got a lot of you guys weighing in on this as well. And we'll start off here with Rodney. Says, degree of relevancy is fallacy. Either you're relevant or you're not. No one talking about South Carolina football in the national media. We're irrelevant. Couldn't beat Kentucky for 7 straight seasons. If that ain't irrelevant, nothing is. Shades of mediocrity. Even the great poet Paul Simon acknowledged that. Mediocre is what you are. Relevant, we are not. And again, look, you're entitled to your opinion. If you think South Carolina is irrelevant, that is totally fine. If you think they are relevant, that's totally fine too. Again, I'm just kind of trying to gauge where people, what the mindset of people is at this point in time with this with this program, and that's fair points that you bring up. Now, I wouldn't say that Kentucky football is completely irrelevant. Are they a program that's had a lot of great success over the years? Not necessarily. They've popped up and had good seasons here and there, but they're a team that's consistently going to bowl games, at least, consistently putting together winning records more often than not. I mean, Mark Stoops been around for, 10, 12 years at this point in time. I certainly wouldn't put them in the moderately relevant category, but I think them and South Carolina are kind of on the same plane. So I don't think losing to them for multiple seasons in a row puts you necessarily in the irrelevant category. And again, South Carolina's finally been able to right that ship these past couple of years. But again, I and this is me personally. If you think differently, that's fine. I just put them in the somewhat relevant because I think there's the opportunity to climb, and I don't think it would be a completely shock to anyone if they were, again, back in that conversation of being a relevant team in the grand scheme of things in college football. Okay, here's somebody else on the other side of things. Jason weighs in and says, perennial top 20 to 30 in national recruiting, that's relevant. Mid-tier SEC, but would be in the top third of any other large conference. Now, the recruiting thing is interesting because that is something that a lot of people point fingers to in terms of where your program's at, where your program's doing, and what your program is building. And if you're usually in the top 30, that's a good sign. Now, you do have to back those results up on the field. And again, we got to remember this, folks. Coach Beamer overachieved in his first 2 years. I think it's easy to point back at this past year and say, I didn't make it to a bowl game, took a step back and all that kind of stuff. And you're not wrong in that. But nobody expected a winning record in year number one, much less a bowl game. The team was projected to win 2 games, and they went out there and overachieved. Year number 2, it looked like they were destined for 6-6, and they went out there and pulled off 2 great victories at the end of the season and made it to a pretty decent bowl game in the Gator Bowl taking on Notre Dame. So the first 2 years were way ahead of schedule for what people thought this team was going to be. Now, yes, again, hindsight being 20, or the what have you done for me lately factor, this past season was disappointment and took a step back. When you look at the scope of things as a whole through the first 3 years, it is probably ahead of schedule from where a lot of people had this team overall. And again, I'm not saying that they are going to be the headline of ESPN and SportsCenter every single day, but there's relevancy to at least a small degree for me in the way that I look at this program from a national standpoint, as well as the fact they've been getting 5-star talent. 5-star talent doesn't typically go to irrelevant programs. Again, you talk about Dylan Stewart, Nick Harbor coming in this past cycle. I mean, gosh, you just got Rocket Sanders out of the transfer portal. Spencer Rattler wanted to come out of here. Like, there's something to this program if high-profile talent wants to come here and play for Coach Beamer and for the University of South Carolina. That's not happening at too many irrelevant programs, if you're going to be completely honest. So, again, as I said, you're entitled to think the way that you want. I'm just trying to get a gauge of it. People are obviously very fired up about this. I'm not trying to upset anybody or make you, throw anything at the radio because my opinion is different than yours. But I'm just interested to see where people think this program is and, what that foundation for expectations can be going forward, whether you think they're irrelevant or not. So, again, this conversation that we can continue on as day goes along. I know Terry has some thoughts on this. We'll get to a little bit later on, maybe get Wes and Chris's thoughts on this as well. But just want to get that kind of general consensus of where people think South Carolina football is at this point in time. So, again, appreciate you guys weighing in. Firehouse Subtext line 803-404-6100, as well as on Twitter at 1075 The Game. We'll talk more college football coming up next. The Group of 5 with an idea of their own postseason. And I must say I'm on board. That's coming up. It's the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on The Game. Welcome back in, Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Wednesday morning here on The Game. Reminder, the craft beer card is back. You can spend $30 at a brewery at 12 different craft beer locations. It's a $360 value, all yours for just $79. Go online to 1075thegame.com. Click on the Sweet Deals tab to purchase the craft beer card. I'll switch gears here in college football. I saw this story come out yesterday. Thought it was pretty interesting. Chris Vanini of The Athletic, as well as Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports, reporting on the Group of Five potentially looking at their own version of the college football playoff. Now, when the college football playoff came about 10 years ago, 2014 season, there was no clear line in the sand when it came to the teams that could make the college football playoff, teams that couldn't. There was always this quasi-belief, similar to like with the BCS, where you had teams like Boise State and teams like that always flirting with making the national championship game, though not quite being able to get over that hump. Now you're expanding from 2 teams to 4 teams having the shot at playing for the national championship. There was that belief that those kind of powerhouse Group of 5 teams were going to have their opportunity to finally get that representation they've been wanted for so long. In the 10 years of the college football playoff, exactly one Group of 5 team has made the playoff, that being Cincinnati back in 2021, and they got beaten pretty handily by Alabama in that game. And no Group of 5 team has made the college football playoff since. So it's obviously evolved, and we've kind of seen the college football playoff become very exclusive, to where those kind of programs know they really don't have much of a chance to make it in general, let alone win it. And with the expanded college football playoff now, with 12 starting this year and 14 and however many more numbers we're going to go to in the years coming forward, there's going to be a seat at the table for the Group of 5. But it's still going to be 11 other Power 5 programs that are going to have to navigate their way through if they want to even make the or the national championship game, let alone get out of the first round. So again, this is being reported on from multiple outlets as of yesterday, that this idea has been going on for a while, but really gained steam after the SEC Big Ten collaboration, as well as the new revenue distribution coming out of the college football playoff, where the Group of 5 under the previous model was getting 22% revenue-wise, and that's been cut down to 9%. Now, overall, the total money they're getting has increased, but again, that percentage is diminished by over half, which means the total value of what they could be making is less than if they would have kept that 22% like they did under the previous model. So they're seeing their ability to make revenue off the college football playoff shrinking more and more and more. One anonymous athletic director was quoted in The Athletic by saying, "We're taking some leadership here to control our own destiny so that Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey don't make that decision for us." They're obviously seeing the inevitable split of college football, where the Power 5 programs go off and have their own thing, a Super League, whatever you want to call it, their own playoff that's completely separate of what we've been doing for the past 100 or so odd years. Obviously, FCS has got its own thing going with its playoff, and it's good there. The Group of 5 would be the area of college football that's left hanging if Power 5 truly does break away like we think they're going to sometime in the near future. So this is almost kind of putting an action plan in place to ready yourself for whenever that probably inevitably does happen. And I must say, I'm completely 100% on board with this. I think they should have been doing this from the beginning. I know this idea has been floated out there, in years past, but it makes a lot of sense to me, to where you can truly crown a Group of 5, so Tier 2, whatever we want to refer to it as, national champion in college football. Because this perception that 134 FBS teams have a realistic shot of making the college football playoff and playing for the national championship each and every year is completely ridiculous, because it's not that way at all. We have 30-ish teams that enter every season with a ability to make a college football playoff, and then as the season rolls along, that number dwindles down more and more and more. And again, when we talk about relevancy and irrelevant programs, there are programs that really don't have any kind of shot at making that college football playoff on a year-in, year-out basis, and some that obviously have a longer road to be able to get there. So I think the Group of 5 doing its own thing works perfectly. and allows them to crown their own champion, allows them to self-contain, and if nothing else, allows them to get the spotlight on themselves for a while. Because when you look at the way the college football calendar is structured, particularly for this year with the college football playoff having its first round games, the week of essentially the weekend before Christmas. So December 20th, 21st are when those first round games are going to be played in the college football playoff. Well, the conference championship games are on December the 7th. And yes, you do have the Army-Navy game on, I guess, December the 14th this upcoming year. But you have 2 whole weeks of no college football outside of the one game being Army-Navy that I feel like would be the perfect opportunity for the Group of 5 to capitalize and have their own little self-contained playoff that truly puts the spotlight on them for a while. You play, I don't know, let's say it's an 18 playoff, right? So you have 4 quarterfinals, 2 semifinals, and 1 national championship game, Group of 5 national championship game, whatever you want to call it, where you can play, all right, let's say those 4 games, play a couple on that Friday night before the Army-Navy game, play a couple in that afternoon, after the Army-Navy game, before, whatever you want to do, and then nail it down to your semifinals. They play sometime the next week or the week after that. And then your national championship is sometime around January the 1st or that following weekend when there is no other major college football games. You have the opportunity to truly stand on your own as the middle tier, the forgotten tier of college football in the grand scheme of things, that I'm completely on board with. Again, the Group of 5 doing something like this and allowing themselves a little bit more spotlight compared to what they've had before. Now, again, this is easier said than done. Because you do have existing television contracts and all those kind of things. But inevitably, if college football splits like we think it's going to in the near future, all those things are going to be disrupted anyway. And if the Group of 5 can come together as one cohesive unit, and that's another part of this, is that the Group of 5 would look to make things make sense a little bit more than the way they have in college football for the past couple of years. As we've seen, it doesn't get talked about as much, but realignment has wreaked havoc on the Group of 5 as well. And the geography is all screwed up. So the idea behind this would be to have a, more regionally, geographically consistent splitting Group of 5, where they're basically divvied up into like 8 divisions with even teams across those. Then you're taking essentially division winners and allowing them to play in this quasi playoff system for the Group 5. And again, there's a lot of specifics to this, a lot of nuts and bolts that would have to be worked out, that it's easier to just kind of sit here and talk about it in a general sense as of right now. But if we can break the Power 5 away to do their own thing, I don't think there's any reason why this kind of thing can't happen. And, one hang up on this is obviously the bowl structure that's currently in place in college football as of right now that, again, I love bowls. And I will happily watch any bowl game going on in the middle of a Tuesday on December the 23rd as much as the next guy. You know what I mean? But it's really holding things back, in my opinion, of where the postseason of college football can go, where the future of it can go, because playoffs are obviously what every other sport does, what every other version of football does. And again, college football's been so tied to the bowl system, I think we're getting to the point where it's truly holding it back because it's being integrated into the college football playoff instead of having home games and all that kind of stuff. So you have the opportunity to really kind of do your own thing here with the Group of 5 playoff if that does indeed come to fruition. And again, a lot of hoops jump through, a lot of things to figure out if you're going to make that happen, especially considering the money side of it. And that is something else I want to get to that we'll get to the other side as we wrap up hour number 1 here of the Extra Point, is how the financial model of this would work and how Group of 5 teams can make this feasible, because it's something that I've talked about that I feel like is going to have more of a prevalence in college football going forward, that being private equity. Let's talk about that coming up next as we wrap up today's edition of the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Wednesday on The Game. Welcome back in. Extra Point, Tyler Head with you on this Wednesday morning. Continuing on this conversation about Group of Five and the potential of them having their own version of the college football playoff, which again, I'm 1,000% in favor of because let's face it, they're not the ability of a Group of Five team to win the national championship in a 12-team college football playoff is slim to none. Because at least in the 14 playoff, like when Cincinnati got in a couple years ago, you're just asking them to win 2 games, right? Saying, okay, beat Alabama, beat, at that time, Georgia, which, again, is not easy, but you can more believably win 2 games against some of the best teams in the country than suddenly having to win 3, 4, or 5 games. You know what I mean? Just depending on where you're at in the, seeding for the college football playoffs. I just think it's made it insurmountable, and especially as we get into this age of college football where the divide between Power 5 and Group 5 is just going to get larger and larger and larger and larger, and a lot of that revolves around NIL and obviously the financial side of college football, which is a big question that a lot of people are going to have about this ability to play a Group of 5 playoff is, well, how are you going to work this out financially? Because there's a lot of money tied up into bowls where you go to a bowl game, it gives your school a big check for making it to that bowl game. And obviously that depends and varies depending on which bowl game you go to and all that kind of stuff. But is a Group of 5 playoff feasible enough and attractive enough to television partners to bring in additional funds? So this whole idea, by the way, if you're curious, was proposed and is being pushed forward by former University of Tennessee head coach. He's been an offensive coordinator, been in the NFL as well, Derek Dooley. Again, the person that's really kind of pushing this forward, and he believes that private equity is going to play a big part in this. Now, that may sound familiar to you if you were listening to this show a week ago. I talked about this quite a bit. Tim Pernetti, who is set to take over as the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference coming up this summer when Mike Oresco officially retires, gave a speech about a week ago and was very forthcoming with, the outside-the-box approach that he's going to take to being the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference. He even mentioned having kind of a different look of the postseason or kind of looking into things that may explore different opportunities for a Group of 5 schools, and also mentioned the future of private equity in college football. Because when you look at every other major sport in America and around the world as well, private equity has a place. College football is the one place that does not have a footprint as of yet. I mentioned a while back that Florida State, who is still attempting to leave the ACC, and there's that huge, massive looming exit fee that they'd have to deal with, they were already shopping around for potential investors to help them get out of that grant of rights and pay that enormous exit fee if it did come to that. Obviously, they've not gotten to that point yet, and I don't know if they ever will, but it's something that was being discussed. And when you look at Group of 5 schools compared to Power 5 schools, the NIL is just not going to be there at the end of the day. In the traditional sense of what we know NIL to be in today's world of college football, where you were literally, for the most part, crowdfunding, where you were going out to your alumni, to your fan base, and saying, all right, if we want to get the best talent, we need you guys to step up, open up those pocketbooks, open up those wallets. Let's get to this goal so we can get this kind of talent to come in and play for our program. That doesn't exist the same way in a lot of these Group of 5 schools because the fan base isn't as large. You have an alumni network, certainly, that may not be quite as passionate about football or other sports as you are at a Power 5 program with a place that you think can contend and have a shot at a national championship. So I think private equity getting involved, I'm not saying I'm for it or against it. I'm just kind of, predicting here where I think this is going to go. I think private equity getting involved makes a lot of sense from these schools' standpoints because it is a guaranteed way to get money in without having to go out there and pound the pavement, as they say, try and get that crowd support to try and compete with some of these Power 5 programs that you're never going to be able to get on the same level as them as far as NIL goes. So with this, also, it creates this level playing ground with a Group of 5 college football playoff where, again, I don't think there's going to be as big of a disparity necessarily between the talent on these rosters because, again, it's still Division I football, but, Group of 5 teams are a lot closer to each other than what, they are to Power 5 teams in terms of the talent on the field. And I'd 100% watch this thing if it did end up, come to fruition. Now, again, it's easier said than done. A lot of hoops jump through, a lot of logistics to figure out if this is indeed going to happen. But with how quickly things shift in college football, it's not unrealistic to think that it's not something that could happen in the next couple of years, especially as this gap continues to grow. And as the anonymous athletic director told The Athletic, Group of 5, they don't want their future determined by what Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti say, because those guys are looking out for the best interest of their conference. And they can say, and look, I love Greg Sankey as commissioner. I think he's doing a great job. And he can say that he's looking out for the greater good of college football at the end of the day. But if it comes down to what's going to benefit the SEC versus what's going to benefit the Sun Belt Conference, guess what? He's going to pick the SEC every single time because that's his job. Same thing with Tony Petitti. And now they're kind of collaborating together. They're going to look out for the best interest of what's going to help the two most powerful entities in all of college football, being the SEC and the Big Ten, because they know they truly run the show. So I can understand how the little brother of the Group of 5, or I'd say, well, when you say little brother, you have the ACC and the Big 12. They're little brothers in college football right now, and the Group of 5 is kind of the infant brother that doesn't stand any kind of chance of going toe-to-toe with these powerful entities as they continue to gain power, continue to gain revenue, and all that kind of stuff. So I think looking at a Group of 5 college football playoff, whatever you want to call it, to determine a G5 champion makes all the sense in the world. And again, you have the ability to play it when there's not a whole lot of other football going on, so you can truly have the spotlight. And, for people like myself that'll watch any college football game anytime, anywhere, you tell me you're going to be the 8 or the 6 or the 4 best Group of 5 teams playing each other in another version of a national championship, I'm 100% going to watch that, especially in the month of December. You know what I mean? I feel like you've got a lot of support if this thing does indeed want to happen. Again, the idea kind of being pushed forward by former Tennessee head coach Derek Dooley, and we'll see if it does indeed come to fruition from the Group of 5 standpoint. But it's something interesting, worth discussing and worth keeping an eye on as, again, so many things shift in the world of college football. And I think many people would certainly be in favor of this happening at the at the Group of 5 level. And you talk about programs that could, I guess, gain some relevancy. You win a Group of 5 national championship. I feel like that's very relevant. Even if it's always going to be seen as that second tier of college football behind what happens at the Power 5 level. But it makes a lot of sense to me, and I would certainly love to see it happen if it does indeed become that. That'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Appreciate everybody weighing in. Firehouse Subtext line as well as on Twitter. It seems like people very, very fired up about this, and I get it. But again, I'm not telling you you're wrong for thinking South Carolina is irrelevant. That is your opinion, and if you want to think that is 100% up to you. I think they're in the somewhat relevant category. But this is a conversation we're going to continue to have as the day goes along. Again, if you haven't voted on our Twitter poll yet, head on over to @1075 The Game on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Give it a vote, and we will continue to talk about this as the day goes along. That'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. 11 o'clock on your Wednesday. Welcome in. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark back in the Herndon Chevrolet Studios. Appreciate everybody that allowed us to be out at Firehouse Subs yesterday up there at Killing Crossing. Great time there. And we had a full 3 hours, and I think we broke down the spring game about 6 ways from Sunday, looked at every single position group. So now we get to this point kind of in the middle of the week, finally kind of putting a bow on the spring game as a whole. And again, we've talked about this a lot. There's reason for optimism coming away from it. There's certainly reason to be concerned about things like the offensive line. But again, I don't think anything really stuck out and surprised you with what we saw on Saturday night.
Yeah, got a chance to hear from Shane Beamer yesterday too, and he kind of said similar things. Obviously, they've reviewed the film now. They've gone through it, and for the most part, it was kind of what he thought it was after watching it the first time and watching it live. Said there were a couple of quarterback decisions that, looking back, maybe those guys would want back. But I think Beamer kind of mentioned one of the things we've kept talking about, and that's just that this is a faster, more athletic, deeper defense. And, I think the biggest takeaway from the spring is that the expectations for that group are very much on the rise. And I would say both externally with the fan base, externally with the media, and then it sounds like internally with the coaching staff as well.
And we do have a little bit of news, Tyler. You might have, discussed that in the last hour. Sorry, I didn't get to listen. But there's a little movement on the transfer portal. So Shane Beamer mentioned last night, I saw, Wes, your outstanding report from the Midlands Gamecock Club meeting, the Welcome Home Tour.
Thank you.
Good.
Literally everything Beamer said, you can find out on GamecockCentral.com.
By the way, both you guys, good audio content. It drives me crazy when you're videoing the coach and you can't hear what they're saying. So both you guys did good with your respective
Wes
welcome
trained me
homes
on how to do it. So, but Sidney Fugar is going to enter the transfer portal. As of last check, I don't think he's officially in, but we did confirm this morning he's going in. And Beamer last night, Wes, mentioned, obviously he didn't reveal that at that time. This happened this morning, we found out. But he said, hey, we're in the middle of these exit interviews, these post-spring exit interviews, and we got a couple guys that are going to enter the portal. Playing time generally. And you can kind of see that, right? Sidney Fugar is a guy that, he started 4 games last year. He started the first 3 games. Didn't play in the last 2 games. Played in 10 overall. And you just seen, they've continued to recruit along the O-line. Brought in a couple more transfers this year. Got Josiah Thompson, a young guy at offensive tackle. You've got Casey Henry back. Tree Babalade trying to build some more depth there. And so Sidney Fugar falls into the category of one of those guys that you're kind of looking after spring going, all right, who are maybe some candidates? You don't like to normally speculate on those things, but he's a guy that's now a veteran player in his college career and didn't seem in line to play quite as much this year as last season.
Well, and we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but I think Fugar is an interesting case in that when he came in a season ago from the transfer portal coming over from Western Illinois, we knew he was going to be kind of a guy that needed time to develop, maybe kind of needed a season or two before he got to that point of where we thought he could be. And again, from the size standpoint, he's got what you look for, but some of the specifics, some of the mechanics and stuff sort of need to be worked on. And he got thrown to the Wolves pretty early on last season due to the injuries and everything like that, and obviously didn't end up panning out. So again, for however much eligibility that he has left, and again, it's always tough to figure that out now with the COVID year and all that kind of stuff. He wants to go somewhere where I guess he can feel like he can go and play right away and contribute a little bit better than he did with this team a season ago. Not to mention the fact he brought in a ton of new bodies on the offensive line that seemingly have taken steps ahead of him at this point.
Well, you look at where things were on Saturday in terms of, again, we talked about it. You're playing 2 split teams, and so that's 4 offensive tackle spots. And Fugar was a guy who has played left tackle, who has played right tackle. And among those 4 spots, you had Josiah Thompson, Casey Henry, Tree Babalade, and A.J. Parks. So, so I think that's maybe an indicator there if I'm Sidney Fugar, like, all right, that not to say that that's your 2 deep, but that's probably fairly close to being some version of your 2 deep. And then that does not include Ja'Kai Moore, who was out and injured. So really, there's probably 5 guys that are ahead of you right now at tackle if you're Fugar. And again, some of those guys may end up playing inside, some may play outside, but just in terms of your options, if you're South Carolina at that position, you probably see the writing on the wall. Beamer was when he talked about it, it was clear he already had a couple of guys that he was specifically talking about, and I think we can assume at this point, now that we know Fugar is going into the portal, that Fugar was one of the guys he was referring to. And he basically said, look, these were positive conversations. It was just guys want to play. And he even said this talking in generally about the program. He's like, we want guys to have a good experience at South Carolina, but we want them to be able to play. And we want for them to, if they're not going to be able to play, to be able to go through their college career and feel like they had opportunities. And so I think those are very positive conversations. I think this is definitely healthy transfer territory. I will say this. We heard Beamer talk about overall numbers on the O-line. This does sort of, I would say, what's the word? It chips away at your overall numbers at that position to where you are a little bit shy for what you would want in terms of your scholarship numbers on the O-line.
Yeah, and we talked about this after he said that. What was that, last week, a couple weeks ago, where you're going through all the names of, okay, these guys are returning, here's some freshmen, here's a couple more transfers in the offseason. They're good on numbers. But then you go and look at the scholarship breakdown, your favorite, Tyler, 15 guys. You're like, well, actually, that is a little bit short from what you want generally on the O-line. You 17, 18 is what you see a lot of times. Well, now with Fugar moving on, now that number is 14. And so, it's not a surprise that we've heard even publicly from the coaching staff that, hey, we might go out and try to find some more depth in the portal. And aside from maybe a name or two, there, you don't really know. And Wes, you talk about this all the time. It's hard to go out and find, okay, here's our starting left tackle from the spring portal.
They don't exist.
It's really, that's kind of a pipe dream. But can you go find a guy who's willing to come in and compete? That actually makes a good bit of sense for you. And your breakdown right now is kind of, taking Fugar out of that equation. You've got, technically, by how we've got it categorized, you've got 6 tackles and 8 interior guys. It's a little bit off because Vershawn Lee, Ja'Kai Moore are classified here as interior guys. Moore has been working probably more at tackle in the spring, and we know Vershawn can slide out as well. So you've got some versatility there, some cross-training. Point is, you might want to add a guy or two in the portal for depth purposes if you can.
So looking outside of just the offensive line, but this team as a whole, and as Beamer mentioned last night, there are a couple of guys expected to go in the portal. Sidney Fugar seems to be the first name of that group. And again, it seems to be guys that just aren't going to be major contributors this fall. They're just looking for better opportunities elsewhere. But in terms of healthy transfers, what is that line of, maybe having too many going into the portal that starts affecting your depth, not just at a specific position, but at your team overall?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you look at these spots and you do want to be upgrading. And my line is sort of not necessarily a number, but I just look at it more from the player's perspective. And if you're an older player and you project to not play, then yeah, I think if you're the staff, you just shake that player's hand and say, it's been good, it's been fun. Like, we appreciate you, we appreciate your hard work, but we get it. I think what you sometimes want to avoid is if you have a younger player who you internally still think they're going to help you one day, but they maybe are just behind some guys right this exact moment. Those are the guys you want to keep. Again, if you want to talk about overall numbers, being at 14 on the O-line now in terms of scholarship guys, that is kind of light, like Chris said. Now, I do think if you go through this list, I don't know if there's a single guy on this list that you just say, oh, that guy can never help you.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's more depth in that. It might not be a bigger overall number, but it's more like, all right, that guy's got a chance. Now, of course, 3 of them are true freshmen. You kind of wait and see on true freshmen. I think we all know Josiah is going to help this program probably sooner rather than later. Shoot, Blake Franks was in there with one of those split first teams at guard on Saturday, and then Cam Pringle's been dealing with some with some injuries and stuff. Had the surgery before he got, or right when he got to campus, I think, and then missed some time during the spring. So I think you can add depth in the portal. It's really hard to add starters, but I think they already kind of have done that. But I think for Fugar, when you look at Parks as a new guy, at least according to our breakdown, those 2 guys are in the exact same class. They both have 2 years of eligibility left, we think. And when Parks is ahead of you and he's new and you're not, and he's the same class, same exact position, those are both tackles, that's your sign.
That does say something, yeah. And I think what you've got to avoid, because there's still some time left in this window. As far as we know, these exit interviews are still going on. And there's obviously still time for guys to change their minds. I mean, we've seen it in the past where guys have gone in to an exit interview, left the exit interview, everything's great, and then they're in the portal. So if you're South Carolina, what you want to avoid is exactly what you are talking about there, Wes. You look through and you see, okay, this guy's a definite contributor. This guy probably can contribute. You want to avoid losing a guy in that category. And that's happened everywhere in this transfer portal era. Probably not as much in the spring as we thought, particularly in the SEC, because, as we know, you're kind of pseudo-prohibited from doing that because of the sit-out rule. And so those are the types of guys that you want to avoid losing. Maybe the guy who maybe hasn't quite carved out a role yet, but you could certainly envision him doing so this year. A guy that's really talented. You look back, he's a former 4-star, something like that. That's kind of inevitable. In this day and age, you're going to probably lose some of those everywhere. But so far, so good for South Carolina on that front.
We'll hear from Coach Beamer what he did have to say at the Welcome Hold'em event of the Midlands last night, coming up as Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls on your Wednesday here on the game. Welcome back in. Sorry. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris with you on this Wednesday. Continuing our conversation of Coach Beamer as we look into the transfer portal. Again, Sidney Fugar go again, not officially yet, but being reported by these guys right here that he's going to be going in very, very soon. Let's hear from Coach Beamer last night at the Midlands Welcome Home event. Cut number 2 here, Dave, about these exit interviews that are being ongoing with these players. Letting them know where they stand.
And I think it's, it would be very easy for us right now to maybe not be as honest as maybe you should be in order to try and keep guys around. And I always want to be honest with guys. I tell our players all the time, Wes, that I want our guys to have a good experience here in this program. And that means being able to play. And if they're coming out of spring practice, they're not in a position where they're going to play a lot. That can change between now and the season, but I also want to be honest with them in regards to here's where you are right now and here's what's got to change in order for you to, and here would be your role if the season started today as well. So we try and have those conversations. All these players are meeting with their position coaches individually, and then every single one of them, all 110 guys we have on our team, scholarship, walk-on, freshman, senior, you name it, they're meeting with me. So be honest and let them know where they stand, but I want them to be honest with me if there's something that they're concerned about and not happy about. I want to hear that too. And we try and do that year round, not just in these exit meetings.
And it's one of those things that, would you love to keep everybody? Absolutely. You don't want anybody to leave your program because they committed to you for a reason. They came here for a reason, and you'd love to see everybody stay. That's not the reality of college football, especially in today's age where we had 300 some odd guys go in the transfer portal back in December. So laying out exactly where you think this guy's going to be at this point or when the fall rolls around is important to do. And then again, as you mentioned, that doesn't mean you can't go into the fall with no expectations of playing and then turn out to be a great player. But more often than not, that's not usually what happens. So again, giving these guys the option to decide to leave if they want to, go pursue that better opportunity, and then allowing South Carolina to bring in somebody in to supplement that spot if that guy leaves, at the end of the day, theoretically benefits everyone.
Yeah, I think you have to do it like that because, like Chris was talking about on the other side of the break, it was one of those things where every school at times will deal with losing a guy that they don't expect to lose. And sometimes that's a guy maybe changes his mind at the last second, has a change of heart. Sometimes that's, other teams sliding in their DMs and kind of just saying, hey, there aren't no rules anymore. But for the most part, if you want to minimize those things, you can't completely stop those things from happening totally. But if you want to minimize them, to me, it is about communication. It is about being on the same page with your players, them feeling like you were honest with them, not telling a guy, hey, you're going to be a starter this coming year, and then they're fourth string when it gets here because, yeah, you might keep them for one off season, but you're not going to keep them through the next portal window. And then they're going to tell all their teammates and position mates and everybody around them, oh, coach lied to me about where I was on the depth chart. And so I think it's all about communication. It's all about honesty. That's how you minimize the damage of the transfer portal. And I do think that healthy transfers are healthy for both sides. They're healthy for the player because they're getting an opportunity to go play. And then they're healthy for the team as well because you, in theory, are filling that spot with somebody who is going to step in and maybe play a little more.
I don't think anybody is feeling bad for highly paid college coaches at this point, but they do have – it is tougher now to deal with the roster management aspect, and it's generally the portal, right, and NIL and all those things, mainly just the portal and the combination of those two things, but it's also hard – it bleeds down, I think, into culture because, there are times as a college coach, let's be frank, and college coaches are not going to admit this for the most part, but there are times when you got to talk a guy into staying. Let's just be realistic. It happens everywhere because we started to see in the last portal window, even places like Georgia. Remember there was a time where we were like, well, this isn't happening at Georgia yet. They're not losing guys. They started losing some guys, and that's when you went, ooh, this thing is kind of screwed up, right? This is hard. There are times when you got to, and when I say talk into, I don't mean like, kidnap the player and make him stay, but you got to kind of, hey, let's sit down and have this conversation. Why are you making this decision? Is it about NIL? Is it about playing time? And in the course of those conversations, you at times need to be persuasive. You got to re-recruit the player. You talk about recruiting your own roster, but you don't want to do what you were talking about, Wes, where, okay, yeah, you can play more. We're going to give you more practice reps, because that can bleed down into your roster. And, hey, that guy might have, it might be 10 other guys in his position room that you're going to have the same problem with, and that can bleed into your culture. It can start affecting your game day as well.
Yeah, you just can't handle it like that, because the other side would be like maybe you tell that guy that. Let's say you follow through with that. Well, what about the guy who was taking those second-team reps, and now they're taking third-team reps because this guy complained to you? You know, like you can't operate like that. The only way, I would say, it almost has to be brutal honesty. Like, that's really the only way it works. Some guys will take that as a challenge. They'll say, all right, coach, you don't think I'm ready? Then, and that's a great outcome as well for everybody, I think. So, you know, I think if South Carolina comes through the portal window, this current one, the way it's sort of trending right now, then they should feel pretty good about where things are.
Do you think some coaches have trouble being brutally honest more than others? And look, Beamer's very much a nice guy, very much glass half full, gives a positive spin to a lot of things. Do you think, not specifically talking about him, do you think some coaches maybe have a little bit more difficult time being brutally honest with their players when having those conversations?
I don't know if they have trouble being brutally honest just in terms of, like, not wanting to sound mean. I think some coaches probably have trouble doing it just in terms of trying to look out for their own best interests. Like, I need to keep this guy on campus. But I do think that's where you have trouble down the line. If you misrepresent where a player is in that competition for a spot, and then it's not like that, then I think ultimately that permeates your locker room. Other guys find out, guys talk, and it's just not, going back to what Chris said, the culture, that's just not the way you build a culture within your program. Speaking of culture around programs and around college football, I got to say, Chris and I talked about this a little off air. My least favorite aspect in all of college football, all of college athletics, is when a guy has a bad game or a guy transfers out, when people just bash the absolute heck out of a guy. Like, I get the passion. I get that you care about it. And I'm not even against, like, saying, okay, this person had a bad game. Like, let's not lie with what our eyes are seeing.
Sure.
But there's no place for just, I mean, Fugar did everything right. He just was, at this point, he was not an SEC productive starter.
Mm-hmm.
You can say that without celebrating that the guy is leaving and just acting like this is some, this is the best news you've ever heard. Like
Sending tweets at him.
That's like,
what does that do?
That to me, that crosses the line completely. And he's like, well, they're paid now. I don't know Fugar's NIL situation, but I highly doubt he was one of the guys racking up a lot of money. So that doesn't really fly with me either. Just have a little bit of class about it. He's still a human being. He tried his best. Is it going to be better off for him to probably transfer down and be able to play a little bit more? Of course, you can acknowledge that without being a fill in the blank.
Yeah, the golden rule is never tweet at high school football players, and be careful how you tweet at college athletes as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's been a little cringy today on the socials, but hey, I mean,
cringe. Yes, that's
I mean,
good word for it.
It's just not a great look. Again, what does it accomplish? I mean,
makes you feel better about yourself.
Self-fulfilling.
I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you got a guy who came
stupid.
here. It's like you said, Wes. I mean, if a guy came here and just was a terrible citizen and things like that, okay, maybe that opens it up a little bit more to say something, but and even then maybe not. But there's no indication that happened here. You can be critical, you can call it like you see it. When you start going like personal for no apparent reason, I don't really get that. Now, us saying this probably not going to make any difference. I don't think we're going to convince anybody of it, but nonetheless.
Yeah, we wish Sidney Fugard the best wherever he ends up, and we'll see who ends up filling that spot and who else may jump in the transfer portal for the Gamecocks over the next couple of days. Come back. I want to introduce you guys to this topic that I've been talking about a lot this morning about the relevance of South Carolina football from a national sense at this point in time, because I've gotten a lot of back and forth by people on this, and I want to get your thoughts. That's coming up. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday here on the Game.
Well, your smartphone can be a pretty powerful device. You can be listening to us on the game. You can be, browsing GamecockCentral.com. But you can also control all of your lights, all of your devices, and your thermostat, all from the touch of buttons on your smartphone. Integrated Media and their team can do it for you. Michael, Nathan, their guys, they do an outstanding job. They've been to my home. They've been to West Mitchell's home. They can come out to your home or business as well and hook you up with a complete smart home, or heck, even a smart business. I don't know if I just made that up, but they can make it smart for you, whether it's at your home or at your business. Security and cameras, TV installation, audio, video, home theater, and complete smart home solutions. They can set it up for you. You can use your smartphone to control your lighting, thermostat, sound, TV, security, and alarm systems. 803-948-8327 or integratedmediainc.com is where you can go to get more information. It's still your home. It's just smarter. Integrated Media.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you. Before we get back into the relevancy conversation, we do have some tickets to give away for Gamecock baseball. This is going to be for Saturday's game. First pitch at 4 o'clock over at Founders Park. First pitch at 6 o'clock over at Founders Park. 2 pairs to give away. Callers number 3 and 4 right now, 803-404-6100. Win yourself a pair of tickets to go see the Gamecocks take on the Wildcats this weekend at Founders Park. Captain Dave anxiously waiting by to take your phone call. So I posted this on Twitter last night and gotten a lot of response from it. Talked about it a little bit earlier, but I want to get you guys' thoughts as well. I said, in terms of national interest, how relevant do you feel the South Carolina football program is right now? Options were very relevant, moderately relevant, somewhat relevant, and irrelevant. Somewhat relevant winning right now at 43%. Irrelevant, though, coming in second place at 34%. And I know a lot of people saying, oh, there's some Clemson people that have gotten in there and voted on that. But the reaction that I've gotten from tweets as well as on the Firehouse Subs text line, a lot of people believe that South Carolina football is irrelevant in the grand scheme right now.
I mean, it'd be interesting to get some context on that. And here's one piece of context that I think people are probably going with in answering that question is, the reality is you went 5-7 last season. If you had asked after 2022, I think your results would have been a lot different because you had just beaten 2 top 10 teams, et cetera. Did the overall fabric or status of your program change from 2022 to 23? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I think you would have a group of people, Clemson fans, Georgia fans, some Gamecock fans, et cetera, who would say, they're irrelevant even after 2022, and vice versa. Some Gamecock fans say we're the most relevant program in the country. Probably not many, but I just think you're kind of it's like a prisoner of the moment thing. Mm-hmm. People are probably just kind of thinking back to last season and the frustrations of that. I certainly don't think that South Carolina's as relevant as like a I don't know, Michigan, what they did, anything like that.
I don't think anybody thinks that way necessarily.
But to say they're irrelevant, I mean, I can't get there. To me, that seems a little bit more of like a frustration.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to pose it as where do you think they are at this exact second type thing. I think it was more of kind of presented as a general overview of the program as a whole. And South Carolina certainly had its ups and downs. I feel like last season was obviously down compared to what the past couple seasons had been. But I think I kind of view it from the lens of, okay, well, if South Carolina suddenly jumped up and became a 9-10 win team again next year, I don't think anybody would be like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. Wow, unbelievable, as opposed to like if a Vanderbilt did that or something like that. Because I put Vanderbilt in that irrelevant category for the most part in college football because they're perennially towards the bottom. Because if they jumped up and had an amazing season, we'd all sit here be collectively surprised by it. I don't think South Carolina is necessarily in that same category, though. Yeah,
and then their coach would get hired away within 5 seconds.
Well, that's what happened to James Franklin.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I think they're obviously a relevant program in that you're in the SEC and you're perennially.
Let me
just be Bill Gunner here and sound it out on air. At least I can say Lancaster, Tyler. But
thanks.
I think are they in the national title, like conference title, relevancy hunt?
Right. No.
Right now, no. Are they an SEC school that is top 25 in recruiting every single year for the most part over the last decade? There's maybe one in there, I think, when you had the coaching turnover that they weren't. Yes. So I think for them, the next step, and I have a way of kind of, it's my own unique way of doing it, but have y'all heard of like the Waffle House Index?
Yeah.
Where it's like if you can tell how bad something is if Waffle House is open or closed, if there's a disaster. Mine is the College Game Day Index.
Okay.
If they're talking about your game on College Game Day, then your game is relevant. If you get one of those like video packages for your game on College Game Day, you're really relevant. But you want for them to be picking your score on College Game Day.
Sure.
And, that has waffled back and forth at times. Sometimes that's about the team you're playing.
Waffle.
Sometimes it's about the team you're playing. Other times that's about you. But I remember when this thing was really rolling every single week, talking the height of the Spurrier era.
Well, they were coming here for game day.
They were coming here, and every single week your game was highlighted on game day. So I think that's my game day index.
And that's why I wanted to separate that into different tiers in terms of relevancy, because I didn't want it to be either relevant or not, because there are different tiers for relevancy. That, yes, the Georgias, the Michigans, the Alabamas are at the top, and they are at the conversation, point of college football all the time. And there are other programs that are kind of in that middle ground. I'd say Tennessee's kind of right there on the cusp of being in that very relevant to moderately relevant space, because they're being very successful as of right now. And again, you kind of have that third tier of somewhat relevant that has the ability to break through that next level. They're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think just, fans, we talk about this all the time. It's always a week-to-week thing.
Sure.
People live and die by every Saturday. So you win a game, and some people are going to be negative even during wins, but sometimes you get a big win that's like, all right, we've turned the corner. Here we go. You lose a game, we should shut down the entire football program. We have no chance to ever do anything, that type of thing. And so, again, I think it depends on when you pose the question. Even if you say take like a holistic, zoom out, 30,000-foot view approach, like what do you think of the program? And people are always going to kind of revert back to, well, this is what I just saw. I just saw 5 and 7. 2022, I just saw back-to-back top 10 wins, right? And so I think that's going to kind of alter the answer and how they view things. But I certainly think it's are they the most relevant? Are they high on some relevancy scale up at the top? No. Does that fluctuate a little bit for a program like South Carolina as
Sure.
opposed to we'll see what happens with Kalen DeBoer. Alabama is still one of the most relevant because
Yes.
of what Nick Saban did there. And that was going to be the case every single year, because they were winning. They were winning titles. They were winning SEC championships. They had Nick Saban, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were kind of the face of college football. So is South Carolina to that? No, nobody would say that. But there are certainly pockets in there where they're being talked about a lot. Some of that Shane Beamer with how he runs the program. Sometimes some of the recruiting thing, getting Nicholas Harbor, getting Dylan Stewart, things like that, picking up some big wins over time. It fluctuates a little bit more.
And a big part of me asking this question is I feel like where you stand on the relevancy scale kind of determines where you set your expectations for a team, for a season, for a program, for a coaching staff, whatever it may be. And again, I hate to keep picking on Vanderbilt right here, but
this is a pick on Vandy program.
it absolutely is. And yes, for South Carolina, we know going into this year, it's going to be a tough year, and saying, you got to get back to a bowl game, if nothing else. That's kind of where the floor of this team is for what our expectations are hopefully going in the year. But that's Vanderbilt's goal every year. It's like, hey, can we at least make a bowl game? If we do, that's great, fantastic. South Carolina's are a little bit more lofty, and is that always justified every single year? No, not necessarily, but we've seen what this program is capable of, and saying, okay, well, can they get to 8-9 wins in the next couple of years? That's something that's a realistic possibility, especially with the talent that you have, that again, I think goes back to being somewhat relevant, that you can set those expectations for yourself, and achieving them is not this, oh my God, I can't believe they did that kind of thing.
Well, to go back to Curtis's point here too, if it is crazy to me how quickly people will adjust their expectations for next season based on what they just saw this season, even though we got a lot of evidence that year-over-year results in college football can be widely varying unless you are just the bluest of blue bloods at the top. And even then, obviously, there's a lot of roster turnover, but it's a little bit easier to just have that consistency at the top of the college football landscape. But you go back, the expectations for even just the way people talk about this current South Carolina era and talk about Shane Beamer and stuff like this, after overachieving for 2 years, the expectation going into last year, the expectations were incredibly high. Now, just because they had a 5-7 season, which certainly is not what anybody over there in the ops building is celebrating, but also I almost feel like it's gone so far back the other way that people act like the program just bottomed out last year and this was a 2-win team. That was not the case. If anything, they were able to kind of tread water and find a way to win some games late and put themselves in a position so that the season did not bottom out on them. So I think in everything right now in sports, though, everything is exaggerated. So if you have a good year and you overachieve, then it's, oh man, they got it rolling there. They may be a dark horse for the title next year.
Right.
If you have a down year, it's hot seat time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, as I've said all morning long, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. If you think South Carolina is irrelevant, that's up to you, and I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. I'll just say that I disagree. I think they're, if nothing else, in the somewhat relevant category with the ability to move up, as time goes along. But one guy, a former Gamecock, is extremely relevant right now, and now he's also a champion. We'll talk about that coming up as we wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on the Game.
Trick shot. Booker. William Slade. The Mad Dragon. Here is your winner. The new NXT champion.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark. Wrapping up today's show, that was last night on the USA Network NXT Spring Break-In. Trick Williams defeats Ilya Dragunov for the NXT Championship. For those that are not familiar, of course, Trick Williams, also known as Matrix Belton from his time here at South Carolina, picking up his first championship in professional wrestling after only being at it for a couple of years.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. We're working on something there.
Trying to.
Yeah. He by the way, he's a GC Live veteran. So
I saw the old clip you pulled up.
yeah. Dude, that was 3 years ago.
I know.
That
I've said what he's done in a short period of time is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and he had just started. He signed like a contract with the Performance Center.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back and looked. When we had him on, it was like the exact month he had signed.
Yeah.
So within 3 years and 3 months, he is NXT champ, and at some point will be on the main roster.
Oh, totally.
I saw an interview. We're not going to make this completely about wrestling. We'll make it about him. But I saw an interview with Booker T, who, for people who don't, I think everybody knows who Booker T is.
That was him on commentary singing along to the song, by the way.
Okay, so Booker T did an interview and basically said that Trick Williams, who is his character now, has a chance to be a generational superstar
Absolutely.
for WWE.
1,000%.
That's from Booker T.
That's pretty awesome.
I mean, I know everything in wrestling is exaggerated, but still, that's pretty big words.
As you mentioned, he's only been doing this for about 3 years, and that's obviously a discipline that some guys takes decades to perfect it, and he's come along very quickly. Obviously very athletic from his time here at South Carolina. It's funny, he kind of has a similar wrestling style to Booker T, just being a big, tall, athletic type of guy. He's got good charisma, very good on the microphone, which obviously helps out a lot, and just connects with the audience. I mean, the theme song, they're going whoop that trick to the song. Like, he just has a connection and a character and like a aura about him that just works perfectly.
And obviously, with anything, you're going to develop, and they've helped him, I'm sure, especially with the in-ring stuff, the business of wrestling. But even listen back to that interview, I put him completely on the spot, and I was like, cut a promo. And he literally reaches behind him. He had some sunglasses prop that I guess he was going to use for something future. They weren't even opened yet.
Yeah.
He pops them open as he's talking, throws them on, and then hits a wrestling promo on the spot. So, and it was for a different character at the time that they kind of had him working through, but still, I was like, man, this guy has got some just pop.
He's got swagger about him.
Yeah, there was an old interview that I did with him that I'm trying to unearth. It's a very old Gamecock Central interview, and I actually still have the audio from it. So I'm gonna dig it up and see what he had to say, because of course it was not about wrestling; it was about football. But even then, I distinctly remember being like, "Man, this guy has like a lot of charisma."
Yeah,
you could, hey, maybe this is a sports media type. So now he's gone another direction, obviously, but he's doing really awesome for himself. And it was really cool, even his story at South Carolina. He went from guy who was a really good high school player at Keenan, then he played at Hampton, then he walked on at South Carolina, won the Outstanding Walk-On Award, and I think maybe it might have even been his first year here, and ended up getting into playing time. So really cool story for a local guy here.
He was telling me some Spurrier stories in that interview too.
Yep.
Just basically how Spurrier, because he's a walk-on, and Spurrier sure didn't know who the walk-ons were at first. And he said, yes, Spurrier came up to him one day. I hope I'm getting this right. It's basically just like, wow, you can catch. And he's like, next practice, I was working with the ones. So that's Steve Spurrier for you.
You think Steve Spurrier is watching wrestling now because of him?
No,
you don't think so?
Yeah, that's a negative.
I think Steve Spurrier forgot who he was.
I don't. Now Spurrier doesn't forget things.
No, he would know.
Okay.
He'd be like, yeah, Patrick Belton, we were playing Florida, and it was 3rd and 2. He had a nice guy. Like he would remember all those things.
Yeah, he doesn't forget things, but I doubt he's tuning in to, what is it, NXT. on Tuesday nights.
I don't watch anymore. I used to be a huge wrestling fan, but I am completely out of the league.
I don't watch. I'm just pulling for Patrick. Like I just think it's
so. Preston,
I think it's awesome.
Preston watched last night. We were texting back and forth about it. He said that's the first match he's watched bell to bell in like 20 years, and he's like, wrestling's a lot different these days than it used to be.
Much different.
And I was like, yes, it is. I'm gonna educate him and Bill over the summer more on wrestling. But congratulations to Matrick Belton, Trick Williams on the NXT Championship. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with myself and Terry Ford coming up next here on the Game.
All right, guys, it is lunchtime. That means it's time to order your Firehouse Subs right now. We were at Firehouse Subs on Killian Road yesterday. Had an awesome time. I wanted to try the new barbecue Cuban, but this thing was so good that Tyler and Chris ate the whole thing before I could even get to it. It's Southern Roots Cuban Twist. Try it today. Try it right now. Or if you want to try some of the other favorites, my number one, again, I haven't tried the new one yet, but my number one still all-time favorite at this point, brisket, add bacon, whatever it is you like, though, they've got an option for you. Hit the Rapid Rescue to go. Avoid the wait. Order online. You can do that 2 ways, firehousesubs.com, or just download the Firehouse Subs app. Save all your information on there, and then the best part, one of the best parts, you're going to get points for every single time you order. Then you can trade those points in for free food later on. It's lunchtime. Enjoy delicious Firehouse Subs right now, firehousesubs.com.